for the rector to appear. Stiamo aspettando la rettrice.
ti sento più.
Hello, good day. Well, I don't know, maybe we have some people online as well? Do we have people online? We're streaming, okay. Hello and welcome everybody. We are absolutely delighted to host you here for those swimmers who have come from far away, swimming against the tide. We are here today and we hope that we will do a lot of swimming with and against the tide indeed. I'm very happy to start this session of the conference today with our rector who has kindly agreed to welcome to today's session, Professor Tiziana Lippiello.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Good afternoon. Dear friends, dear guests, dear students, colleagues, it's a pleasure and honor for me to open the Venice chapter of the Talanoa Forum, an international event involving scholars, artists, and practitioners, which offers Foscari a wonderful opportunity of cooperation, networking, and significant scholarly debate on important subjects such as indigenous rights and self-representation, eco-justice, intersectionality, and colonization. Talanoa is a new word for me, a new reality. It is a pan-Pacific word describing a process of inclusive, participatory, and transparent dialogue, a mode of communication that cannot be fruitful in our academic world, too. So I welcome the cooperation between the Niche Center for Environmental Humanities, and I wish to thank Francesca and also Shaul for being so active in this new center in our university, and the artist Yuki Kihara, who is not yet here, but she is arriving in a while, and curator Natalia King, representing the New Zealand Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. This partnership is crucial to a dialogue between the arts and the environmental humanities in a global fashion. So I wish you a good day, 2 days conference, and many of you are arriving from Oceania, and I'm proud to welcome all of you at our Foscari University. I cannot list all the names of the speakers, but I would like to give a special welcome to the two lead speakers, Professor Emerita Ngahuia Te Awekotuku and Professor Veronica Strang. Welcome to all of you and have a good stay here in Foscari University and in Venice. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiziana, for this address and for welcoming our visitors here. We are also streaming, so we say hello to the people abroad. I know that there are quite a few people who would have wanted to be here with us in Venice. Of course, one of the things that we're trying to do here is to be absolutely and radically local as well as global, right? I mean, this is one of these radical pedagogies that we are trying to explore in this particular context. And we are learning, the path has been wonderful to get us all here. We started, I don't remember actually, Natalie and Yuki, when they came to meet us, we had many conversations with many of the people here, conversations, dialogues in this really important mode of the Talanoa. So in a sense, this Talanoa moment is the product of many Talanoas that have already happened. The fact that, conversations are, and the common production of knowledge, right? Sharing knowledge, producing knowledge together. I think this is one of the important messages that we are learning. And thinking the planetary with a very local roots. The importance of local activism. This is one of the things we are learning. Starting from that particular point of view, learning to then translate specific issues in another context. So small island ecologies, for instance, and places of crisis. The Pacific is a place of crisis in the climate change era, and Venice, of course, is another place of crisis. And transforming these moments in productive also redemptive in a sense, exercises of living this particular age. So without further ado, I also want to thank all the people who have helped us, all our colleagues at the center. Here we go. Yuki Kihara has just arrived. Hi, Joanna. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. People are also learning to negotiate the colors and the in-depth, the locality of deep Venice. So, as I was saying, it is very important for us to be together, even if everything that has started, of course, online. For many of the people here, our online lives have been very long, very different. COVID, I think, has brought a new desire for intimacy, a new desire for, but also a new desire for presence. So it's definitely hopefully a transformative time that we are going to live here together. And as I was saying, I wanted to thank everyone that has helped us to be here at the center. Barbara Del Mercato, of course, was very, very present in all our meetings and discussions, and Giulia Brolese, Roberta D'Argenio, and all the people here, and the many colleagues at Foscari who have opened themselves up to this transoceanic dialogue. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you the students of Environmental Humanities for all their work, and I leave the floor to Professor Bassi, Director of the MA in Environmental Humanities.
Good afternoon. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to speak with such distinguished guests and in the presence of our rector and of my colleague and friend Francesca Tarocco and our very distinguished speaker. It's wonderful to welcome back old friends and new friends, and to especially speak on behalf of the Master's degree in Environmental Humanities at Foscari at the Talanoa Forum. Special thanks to our students. I'm really pleased and honored to have them here with us today. They will kick off the discussion after the talk. As our rector, Tiziana Lippiello, I also have learned the word Talanoa here for the first time, and it's sort of a wonderful addition to our vocabulary. The word forum reminded me of the observation made by an English traveler called Thomas Coriat in 1608. He walked all the way from London to Venice and described Piazza San Marco in these terms. In Piazza San Marco, you may both see all manner of fashions of attire and hear all the languages of Christendom, besides those that are spoken by the barbarous ethnics. Of course, they were not very politically correct in 1608. The frequency of people being so great twice a day that a man may very properly call it rather orbis than urbis forum. That is, a marketplace of the world, not of the city. For you shall not see as much as one Venetian there of the patrician rank without his black gown and tippet. There you may see many Polonians, Slavonians, Persians, Grecians, Turks, Jews, Christians of all the famous regions of Christendom, and each nation distinguished from another by their proper and peculiar habits. The tradition of Venetian tolerance should not be romanticized or exaggerated, but there is no question that for centuries the cosmopolitanism of the city, dictated mostly by pragmatic commercial considerations, was one of the most striking features for all international visitors. In our century, I was discussing with our distinguished speaker a few minutes ago, this ethnic diversity has some very dark sides, like the unsustainable pressure of tourism, itself depended on the exploitation of the migrant labor of marginalized and vulnerable communities. But this same cosmopolitanism also expressed itself in the international vocation of the city as a world capital of art and culture. And I can safely say that having, witnessed the metamorphosis of the city in the last decades, that the city could be crushed by too much tourism and hopefully saved by a massive investment in art, culture, and the recreation of creative communities of full-time and part-time residents. In this light, Foscari has played a pivotal, and can play a pivotal role. As we immerse ourselves in a forum that centers on New Zealand art and cultures in front of an audience of very important guests and of students who come from all over the places, it may be interesting to point out a few historical facts. I'll be very brief. Foscari has been a pioneer in post-colonial studies in Italy, having since the 1970s had a chair in Commonwealth literature, another denomination that is not, it's obsolete by now, but that 50 years ago was certainly constituted a radical innovation that initially focused primarily on Australia. Foscari was the place when, since 1994, we have published the first post-colonial journal in Italy, Il Tolomeo, now an online open access journal in 4 languages. And Foscari was the place where the Italian Association of Post-Colonial Studies, now called ISCLI, was convened for the first time in 2001, in a department that, if I'm not mistaken, was the only one in Italy to ever have the word post-colonial in its official denomination. All of this while the word post-coloniale remains unregistered in Italian official language repertories. If you look it up in the dictionary, it does not exist. So it's used in hundreds of books and volumes, but the Treccani and other dictionaries do not recognize post-coloniale as a concept. The environmental humanities at Foscari were born just a few years ago at the crossroads of different complementary disciplinary areas. The pioneering science degree in environmental studies, the honor tradition of Asian and North African studies, represented here by our rector and director, and post-colonial studies. The creation of the center that is now called the New Institute Center for Environmental Humanities, NICH, was the catalyst for a new, important, timely, urgent experiment. Building on the center research projects and with the contribution of like-minded colleagues from 6 departments, we were able to launch in 2020 the first Italian 2-year master's degree in environmental humanities. And all the first students are here, fully taught in English. From the very beginning, we were resolute that its rich interdisciplinary academic offering should be complemented by a dialogue and collaboration with all the scholar and creatives who bring to Venice illuminating artworks and projects. And there is no doubt that the planetary environmental crisis we are facing requires a radical reimagining of our world, bringing into productive conversation and cross-fertilization various forms of knowledge. So as faculty and students of environmental humanities, we feel truly privileged to be part of this historic forum, and we look forward to 3 days of intense learning and aesthetic experience. Having said that, it is really a great, great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Ngahuia Te Awekotuku is an emeritus professor and Ruānuku, Venerable Elder Scholar of Ngā Pae o Te Māramatanga, New Zealand's Māori Centre for Research Excellence. She's also a fellow of the Auckland World Memorial Museum, and she reminded me that her PhD in 1981 was on the impact of tourism on Maori culture. So I think we have definitely some shared concerns in a widely different context. And that early research ignited a lifelong passion for arts and heritage. She has fought for Maori, women, and LGBTQI rights for over 5 decades. In the museum and gallery sector, she has been a curator, lecturer, performer, critic, and governor. As well as fiction and poetry, her works on culture, gender, and sexuality have been published extensively. She curated the award-winning exhibition Enauri Wakatupu, Weaving Legacies, and she now lives among the hissing fumaroles and steamy hot pools of her natal village in Rotorua, Aotearoa. Is that? Yeah, okay, that's great. She holds the New Zealand Order of Merit, and we are truly, truly honored to have her speak on Gauguin reflections. So please help me to welcome Ngahuia Te Awekotuku.
Wairea ki te rangi e tūnei. Wairea ki te papa e ta koto nei. Wairea ki ngā wai tapu o ta ngā roa e. He wai ta whito. He wai mātauranga. E rauranga tira mā tēnā rau koutou, karanga mai ki tēnei uri, a te iwi Māori, ngā mihi kauana ki a koutou. Our Rector, Professora Tiziana Lippiello, ngā mihi ki a koe. Our Director, Francesca Tarocco, ki a koe hoki. Professor Shaul Bassi, ngā mihi kauana. I feel as if I'm in the center of the universe right now, standing here in this extraordinary environment, listening to the water outside, enjoying the beauty of the skies, understanding too that not far from here, many of my family are lying in the graves of World War II. So I come in honor of them, and I also come at the invitation of a dear friend and iconic personage, Yuki Kihara, ngā mihi ki a koe te tuahine. Thank you for this opportunity. It is extraordinary. Also to my sisters and brothers from the Pacific, from Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, ngā mihi kauana ki a koutou. I don't know, Māori usually stand when they speak. It's very hard to do it sitting down, but I will try. And if I get up and start extemporizing and throwing myself about, it's a cultural thing. You can stand if you can. Can I stand? Okay. Let's try standing first. Oh no, I'll sit because everybody else is sitting. The opening slide is my house. Is my house. This house is Tamate Kapua, a ceremonial centre, a place that was built originally in the 18th century on an island in the middle of Lake Rotorua, and then was taken onto the mainland and rebuilt there. This house is where I grew up, where I learned my songs, my language, my dances, my stories, and I was very privileged. So I begin the Talanoa, and I'm looking at Gauguin's work, but I'm also wondering about who were they really? Whom exactly did he portray? He whakaaro whakawahine. Our languages are very closely related in the Pacific, so whawhawhine in the Māori language is whakawahine. Just in case you need a bit more orientation, this is also where I grew up. Fumaroles, boiling mud, hot pools, dynamic environments, as well as clear skies and pure water. And this is not a tourist commercial. We are part of Polynesia, so this is just to locate most of our speakers over the next week. But Māori have had a very different history. So I'll just give a quick précis. We were come across, I won't say discovered because we were already living in there, in 1769 by James Cook. And he estimated there were 100,000 people probably. Many, many more though that he never ever saw were actually living in the interior. The current population of my country is 4.5 million. Of that 4.5 million, and I left out the million, I'm sorry, 20% report some Māori ancestry. That means there are 900,000 people with blood. We speak a common language. Māori speak a common language, and this, I think, creates its own unity. However, we have been assimilated to speak English, and English has been privileged. And I won't go into the Māori language debate here, but it is vicious, it is painful, and it has taken us 50 years for it to be truly recognised. In 1840, we signed a treaty with Britain, and this is one of the few treaties ever signed by one sovereign state with another in Aotearoa and in the history of British colonialism. But they broke it within 2 years, and the wars continued from 1842 to 1916. Why? By 1891, 50 years after the treaty, there were 626,658 white people. That number doesn't include us. Of Māori, including half-castes, there were just over 40,000 left. So that describes what has been seen as a particularly harsh environment, and from 1850 we talk about the decades of despair. However, when Cook arrived and various other people, like for example the French colonial voyagers on the Astrolabe, one of the artists, Auguste de Saint-Saëns, was truly obsessed with the beauty of the men. This response continued with other early 19th century artists. I'm showing you now Joseph Jenner Merritt, who married a Māori woman called Maria Rangitetaia, but who was also very involved with Māori communities. Alas, he died very young. He died in his 30s. He would have made a difference, I'm sure. This painting dates from about 1839, before the treaty. Just after the treaty, along came another white fellow. His name was George French Angus. In 1847, he published a book called The New Zealanders Illustrated. And again, there was an emphasis on the beauty of the men. And that's relevant to our discussion. This is one group that he depicted, and you can see in the pose, in the garments, in the manner, you ask, what were they? Who were they? What are we looking at? Coming back, though, to 1850, and the beginning of that time, the decades of despair, the population, as I said, was critical. Disease, armed conflict, and land loss devastated the Māori people. In 1856, a politician by the name of Featherston, Isaac Featherston, offered this comment to Parliament: "It is the duty of Europeans to smooth down the dying pillow of this Māori race." However, some tribes, like mine, Ngāti Whakaue of Te Arawa, in the thermal regions, amongst the fumaroles and the geysers and the healing springs, decided they'd do something else. And in 1880, an agreement was negotiated with central government for the opening of a township that would be based on tourism, on the spa sensibility of the late 19th century, on the opportunity to open to the world the glorious healing springs, silica terraces, and wonders of our volcanic landscape. This was a really ambitious plan that ended up actually being blown to pieces by the eruption of an almost Pompeian, massive, huge volcano that wiped out most of the product. So there is an irony in that. 6 years later, the investment was demolished. But we continued as a people of resilience and survival. On we went and developed new ways, explored new geyser valleys, showed more things, and the healing water was always there. The first tourists came in the 1830s. They wanted the healing miracle of the water. They were also fascinated by the exotic culture, by the dance, particularly the war dances of the rather interesting men, by the visual arts, by the women, by the irony of it all. And I look at this very closely in my PhD. My family has been deeply involved in the tourist experience since that time. The image you're seeing now is my grandmother and my great-aunt. This was a postcard from about 1895. Following that is another carte visite, and this one dates from 1905, in which year, according to historian Michael King, 9 million carte visite postcards were sent from Aotearoa, New Zealand. How many of those were images like this? What did that mean for the women and the men posing and for those receiving these images? And who posted them all? A lot were posted by Māori. At the time of the Treaty of Waitangi and that signing, there were more literate Māori on my islands than there were literate Europeans. And that situation continued for a number of decades. Literacy, the knowledge of reading and writing, was grasped by the Māori people as early as 1818. The first visits to Britain took place in the 1780s and 90s, and Māori were writing then. There were also quite famous scribes and scholars because the art of literacy was seen as a particularly valuable way of transmitting information and recording knowledge. And by the mid-century, by 1850, there were two well-established scholars, Wiremu Te Rangi Kaheke and Te Mātorohanga, whose work was published. Māori embraced literacy, education, and as much or much more, we coveted arms. Ngā rākau kōhuru a te Pākehā. Weaponry, the opportunity to conquer other tribes, the opportunity for expansion was irresistible. And this is a part of the colonial project that seldom gets discussed. But it happened in my land, in my grandparents' time. However, we were not in any way prepared for the population explosion of the 1860s. In response to Featherston's comment about the dying pillow, inevitably, many white gentlemen scholars became extremely busy recording their version of a race doomed to extinction. And there was this massive succession of learned anthropological, sociological, psychological examinations of my ancestors. Also at the same time, people like Goldie, Lindauer, Darby were painting us images of a fading people. But what is seldom acknowledged is that many of the pictures, many of the sitters, particularly by Lindauer or for Lindauer, were works commissioned by chiefly Māori families for their own homes. There are more than a few Goldies and Lindauers in private hands in the villages scattered around my islands, but we don't tell very many people where they are. Anyway, continuing, by the 1930s, there was literally a load of books on Māori, by non-Māori, by Pākehā. And within the tribal communities, there was active resistance to this. One of the most important was the emergence of a group of young scholars, of young Māori politicians. And I've got to also mention here that politically, Māori have been within the New Zealand parliamentary system since 1867, when we were given seats. Now we have 7 seats, which aren't very many, given that there are 115 seats all up in the New Zealand Parliament. But we have 7 that are very much our own. As well as that, though, in the current administration, there are over 30 Māori members of Parliament with Māori blood. So changes are happening. However, this is what Sir Peter Buck said to his friend, Sir Āpiranga Ngata, in a letter dated 1931. Kua mutu te wā kia te pēhima, kua riro mā tāua mā te Māori taua kōrero. The time for Best, Elston Best was a very famous ethnographer, and his friends is over. We as Māori must take responsibility for recording our world for ourselves. As a result of that, I'll just show you some of the publications, and I've listed 4 that appeared before 1930. So Māori were also publishing scholarship. We really wanted to be in control of our cultural expression, of our knowledge transmission, and of our future. We wanted our own voice and our own agency, and this desire has never, ever diminished. So I come to Gauguin, 2 of my favorite images. I looked at Gauguin. My degrees are in art history and English literature. with a little smattering of resistant anthropology, all due respect to Nicholas Thomas. And I looked at these two paintings particularly, and I saw many of my uncle, aunties, many of the people with whom I grew up. And in 1992, at the Auckland Art Gallery, there was a massive international exhibit of Gauguin's work, and part of that exhibit was a symposium on Gauguin himself. And I thought, yes, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to share what I see when I look at those pictures. Particularly Tamatete, the market, and of course, Ha'apuani, the sorcerer of Hivaoa. That painting could be one of my uncles. He was a tohunga, he was a shaman, he was a ritualist, and he looked just like that. And dare I say it, but he dressed like that too. And so I come to my encounters of the 1960s. I began my bachelor's degree in the mid-1960s in Auckland. And most of the uncle aunties had fled to the big smoke for more excitement and sophistication. And here are a few of them. Some have gone. On your left is the glorious Carmen Rupe, and behind her is Georgina Bayer, who was the very first ever transsexual member of Parliament for a general, not a Māori seat in the New Zealand government. And they're actually photographed outside the house. In the central section is Chrissy Witoko, and Chrissy was very much the matriarch of the young whakawahine, whakawahine of Wellington in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Below her is someone with whom, as a ferocious young butch, I fell desperately in love. Her name is Natasha Allen, and like Carmen and like Chrissy, she has moved on to her next life. But Natasha was extraordinary. And then, just to bring back into the room yet again the sorcerer of Hivaoa. This is Ramon Tewaki, who was a television director, a dancer, a choreographer, an extraordinary human being, and someone whom Yuki knows quite well. Ramon is a contemporary of us. And when you think of the sorcerer, of Gauguin's image, you see Ramon. And that is why I responded to his work the way I did. How did I end up there, apart from growing up with auntie uncles? I grew up in a tourist environment. I grew up questioning, meeting foreign people, wondering about the world outside my village. My family were weavers, are still weavers, carvers, singers, dancers, entertainers, tour guides. And so for me, engaging with people was really important. I arrived in Auckland. I went looking for my uncle aunties, most of whom had taken off to Sydney and greener pastures. And I became very involved with the radical activist communities against Vietnam, against apartheid, and also in the emerging feminism and gay liberation movements, and of course, Ngā Tamatoa, the movement for Māori land, language and cultural rights. But as a young whakatāne, someone who was non-binary, I was also really conscious of what was happening to us out there in the world when homosexuality was criminalized and when life was quite hard. So I wrote this in 1971, much to the dire and unsupportive response of my professors and academic mentors. This was in the student newspaper in July 1971. It was an article entitled Lesbianism, the Elegance of Unfettered Love, 1971. And it was also a piece that looked at gay rights generally. We are not dangerous or subversive perverts, but real and thinking individuals. Why should we hide our faces while the public exposes its bigotries? Why should we be invisible? And this is where the whakawahine, the whawhine, the whakatama, the whakatāne made a difference then and make a difference now. Invisibility is death. We can no longer afford that. And way back in the days of criminal risk, it was simply wrong. So continuing, I've talked about men living in the manner of a woman. There were also women who lived in the manner of a man in my world, and the rather splendid personage in the hat is my partner's aunt. She was a composer, a choreographer, a truly inspired creative, and her name was Tuini Ngāwai. And, you can't really see her face, but the person in a tuxedo about to go to a tribal cabaret is me. And that was 1980. The confident assertion of our own voices and the need to claim that right and not be persistently and dispassionately interpreted by others is an issue that we are constantly interrogating and which we are attempting to redress. We have our own voices, we have our own truths, we have our own lives, and we demand the right to have our stories told first by us. Now, since 1992, and my essay, which I gave to Yuki a few years after the symposium on Gauguin, and which she appreciated enormously, ngā mihi anō ki a koe e Yuki. A lot has happened over the 30 years. Books have been published. Carmen, whom you met earlier, and this is her memoirs, Having a Ball. Change for the Better by our former Member of Parliament, who also for 6 years served as the elected mayor of a small New Zealand rural town, Carterton. So Georgina, the Honourable, was a mayor before she became a member. And this was something very clever that she mentioned in her maiden speech. The third book is by a famous entertainer and extraordinary non-binary human who often enacted Carmen, who was very much an influence on Mika's life. I Have Loved Me a Man, The Life and Times of Mika. It's a good read, outrageous, XXX rated. The next book is by an incredibly conservative, chiefly remarkable, fabulous old man, Ngahuia Te Awekotuku, in the air. He was our first national broadcaster in Māori and English, extremely well educated, so elegant, had a BBC received voice and captured our souls. I regret he passed away in recent times, but his biography is another really important read. I've also included two anthologies that I think are quite significant. One in particular, authored by Yuki, with Dan Tolapapa McMullen, and it is an extraordinary commentary and series of life stories by whakawahine. And the other book is O Auno Ke Ia, which was written by the Mahu community of Hawaii. So in the last 30 years, those voices are coming out there and are being presented. I've also included two works of slightly personal memoir/fiction, one by Witi Ihimaera, a well-known Māori novelist, Nights in the Gardens of Spain, and I've shown you as well my own anthology, Tahiti, which is a collection of stories about a tribal Māori, non-binary, female-born, rough village girl who struggles with life and emerges triumphant. And it's based primarily in the mud pools and the fumaroles of my village. So I conclude with those images, with that reminder, we have our voices, we have our experiences, we have our understandings. Our voice comes first. Nō reira, e rangatirama. One of the things that was often said to me by various whakawahine, whakawahine, and one in particular, and I'm referring to Ngahuia Te Awekotuku, is this: whaia tō iti kahurangi, hei oranga ngākau o te iwi. Follow your dreams, make your people proud. Nō reira, e rangatirama, tēnā no tātou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you for a marvelous journey, for an incredibly generous presentation that has allowed us to enter a world that has some familiar icons and images for us, but you've shown its many unknown or less known aspects. To start a discussion, I would like to invite the representatives of the community of environmental humanities students. Okay. And so we have Melissa Herlitz and Holden Turner, who have very generously worked with other students to collect some preliminary ideas and thoughts. So I invite her to sit and break the ice. Then, of course, we are going to invite the entire audience to our Q&A. So, Melissa, please.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for this presentation today.
My privilege, thank you.
Your words and reflections about your ancestors reminded me of another conversation I had with a scholar a couple of weeks ago, Elizabeth Povinelli, who has worked with her ancestral community in Italy as well as alongside Aboriginal tribes in Australia to do some reflecting on what it means to look toward the future while also, carrying our history with us. And she used this phrase that I thought was really interesting. She said, we should go forward with our ancestors. And I really liked that, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and I wondered if maybe that phrase resonated with you, or maybe in what ways you carry the memory of your ancestors with you in your work.
Thank you. That's a probing question. And my immediate answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. When I arrive in another country, I'm not alone. When I began the presentation today, I opened with a chant that addressed the skies and the sea and the land. And in addressing the land, I remember people from my parents' generation who are buried on this land, which links us. So the Māori Battalion, 28th Māori Battalion, fought all the way from Trieste, all the way down to Sicily. We were a major fighting force through these mountains, across these rivers, and our bodies have littered your landscape. Those are the people I think of when I sit here. For Māori, that war was the price of our citizenship, and yet actually what did we get? And one of the more fascinating aspects is that in the last 2 years, the government of Italy, granted the oldest and only surviving member of that battalion a knighthood. And that's kind of astonishing. And we hope to come back, here's my uncle, we hope to come back later next year for him to receive it. So that's, he's 97. But he's extremely active. So our memories and our stories keep the ancestors alive. We never walk alone. As Polynesians, we never walk alone. As Aboriginal people, people of the earth, we're never alone. So I absolutely get that statement. And I certainly affirm it from my own experience. That was a long answer.
I would like to ask a question on a slightly different topic. You used the word whakawahine, and I would like to ask what that means in relationship to the English word queer, which is what I'm more familiar with. Is it a direct translation, or is there something? No.
No, and I think that a translation of the term whakawahine is best offered by a whakawahine, and we have at least two in the room. Possibly that can be addressed at some other time. Would you like to, please?
Hello, I think, could you come to the microphone for the streaming?
Thank you, Yuki. Not going. Do you want to come and use my one?
Geez, it's going to be a short comment. Um, Anyway, buongiorno, tala falava. My name is Yuki Kihara. I'm the artist that's representing the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion here at the Venice Biennale. So to answer to your question, so the word fa'afafine is made up of two Samoan compound words. So fa'a meaning in the manner of, and fafine meaning woman. So when you put the word fa'afafine together, it means in the manner of a woman. But if I was to be precise about the role of this woman in fa'afafine, it means that she is a mother. So the word fa'afafine is used to describe those like myself, assigned male at birth who express their gender in a fabulous way. And then we also have fa'atama, meaning in the manner of a man. And then so traditionally we are given a role in the Samoan society as caregivers. We have a very domesticated role, and we are assigned to look after young children and the elderly, and that's solely what we do. And then there has been many studies. I know that I also refute anthropological studies of fa'afafines, but there's been studies that came out of Canada that describes fa'afafine meaning super uncles. I don't know what that means, but basically what they found is that children that are raised in extended families with fa'afafines are better looked after because they have a second income. So you have the income of the parents and you have the income of the fa'afafine, and then that's how children are looked after. However, our traditional role as fa'afafines and having a more domesticated role has now evolved with capitalism. And then so now you see us representing New Zealand at the at the Venice Biennale. And we also have Alex Su'a, the Madam President of the Samoa Fa'afafine Association, who is over there.
Who was the senior lawyer.
And then so Alex is a lawyer. And then so our support in our kinship system, in our extended family system, is that I don't like doing domestic tasks, but I certainly support my family in other ways. But the idea of care within the extended family system continues to shift with as we shift with capitalism. So yeah, it means bringing home the bacon.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yay, thank you.
May I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yeah, sure.
So in this idea of care among family and extended family and perhaps non-family relations, I'm also thinking of a paradigm that we have in environmental humanities, which comes out of the US and European context, which is queer ecology, looking beyond simply heteronormative or cisgender ways of relating to others and relating to non-humans environmental factors. So where does that politics of care that you're describing extend in any ways to non-humans or to other entities around you?
So certainly with me it does. I can't speak on behalf of all fa'afafines, but for me, our lives as indigenous peoples from the Pacific is intrinsically tied with land. And then so land is also tied with many other elements in nature, to forests, to waterways, to insects, to fish, to living beings and all kinds of organisms. So when we talk about land, we don't just talk about the land that we stand on, but all the organisms and all the ecologies that surrounds it. And then so our identity is intrinsically tied with land. So whatever you do to the land and how you perceive the land is something that gets reflected on us. And unfortunately, through the process of colonialism and missionization that separated the man from the land, and heteronormatized at the same time, fa'afafines and their relationship with nature has often been disconnected. However, in the advent of climate change, what you see is that many of the policies and legislations around climate change, disaster risk management, disaster economic recovery, and all that, UN Green Climate Change Fund money doesn't, particularly in the Pacific, doesn't really trickle down to the whakawahine community because it's really heteronormative. So for example, in 2009, in September 2009, when there was a major tsunami that took place that was responsible for the death of 189 people. Among the first responders to the rescues were these group of whakawahines that went on site of the tsunami and pulling out bodies and body parts out of the debris. And then they helped them relocate in higher ground. And then so all the governmental departments, all the whakawahines that work in various governmental departments, while everybody didn't know what to do, it was the whakawahines that worked with other departments that brought the rescue efforts together. However, the whakawahine in that worst hit area felt like their needs were not addressed. And then this is where Paradise Camp, becomes a clarion call about decolonizing the understanding about policies and legislations about climate change that are so heteronormative that all of that kind of green climate change fund doesn't actually trickle down to us. And yet people rely on us to do things. We're expected to do things, but we're not given that support. But Alex can tell you that last week, Alex presented to members of parliament about the things that we urgently need to be addressed in the whakawahine community, with the view that we hope that in the next government budget, they actually allocate some funds towards about whakawahine activities, including our mitigation with climate change. Because 80% of the Samoan population, we live around the coastal areas. And then, so the global average for climate, for sea level rise is 2.8 to 3.5 per year. In Samoa, we experience sea level rise of up to 4 millimeters per year, and it's rising. And in those 80% that we live around the coastal areas, are whakawahines that everybody depends on. Everybody, from the cooking to the cleaning to the caregiving to paying the bills. So once you try and remove us, then that's the Samoan society in collapse. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think it would be fascinating to hear an answer to the same question from our speaker.
Okay. Yuki covered it so beautifully, and I wouldn't dare attempt to define another cultural tradition when there are representatives of that tradition here. But I will answer the question that you made about sentient creatures and the notion of a queer ecology and relationship with the environment and the creatures within it. What's interesting about Aotearoa, New Zealand, and certainly Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, that voyages from the islands of Tahiti, Tuamotu, Rarotonga, and parts of the Pacific that my sisters on that side of the room share, is that they came south, our ancestors came south from those islands deliberately, knowingly, to settle in the land of the long white cloud. What is interesting is that when they got to this extraordinary, mountainous, fertile, astonishing, rich land, there was no one there, but also there were no animals. There were no quadrupeds at all. There were only birds, fish, and insects. On the voyaging canoes, they brought rats, which became very edible, and they brought dogs, like Venice got lots of dogs. They brought dogs. They attempted to bring puaka, pig, and somehow they fell overboard and didn't make it to my land. And that's really quite fascinating because we kept the memory of the pua'a, of the puaka. And when Cook, that man I mentioned earlier, turned up, he had one on board. And the sage tohunga, the shamans whom he met, saw the animal and knew what it was. And instantly, of course, recognized a food source. So that the primal relationship within that ecology would be as a food resource. But also, too, many tribal groups claim descent from animals. My own clan, Te Arawa, we call ourselves the people of the shark. We're sharks. My partner, who was this robust and remarkable woman, she is a person of the whale. It's a mixed marriage. Not a killer whale. Actually, it's a great big blue whale called Paikea, who was the subject of a beautiful film called Whale Rider. So there are lots of other ways too, our relationship with the forest, with the trees. On my father's line, I am the descendant of the relationship, the coming together of the mist and the mountain. And from that mist, Hene Pukohurangi, and the mountain, Maunga Pohatu, came my father's people. So there is a very strong, organic understanding of the relationships and the relationality for the survival, not only of that knowledge, but of that environment. At the same time, though, I will admit, for those of us who still own our own land, there has been an utter seduction by the corporate sector, and in the 1980s, there emerged this ghastly creature called the corporate warrior, otherwise defined as a young Māori man wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase with an accountancy or commerce degree, and they had a new view of the world. But even in the time of Ngata and Buck, whose works I showed you earlier, there was a need to develop the land and to develop it in a way that was commercially viable to support the community. We are realizing now, just as we realized with my people's tourism, that actually you are doing that type of development at what cost? I like to think that in the next generation, that entire value system will be reconsidered and we'll go back to the original and the ancestral, which is that every tree has a name and a spirit, and if you look at that big tree and see with your creative eye a canoe or a house, then before you fell the tree, you ask permission, you engage with the spirit of the tree, and then you create something beautiful. It's that type of relationship that persisted in the Māori world until about 1940, And this has been recorded by the elders, but is also on some archival film. There's a film called Tahia Tiki, The Making of a Māori War Canoe, and the footage in that shows the rituals in taking the tree down. Another, and I must mention her, another film that was made in the 1930s and reconstructed and shared again with the world was a film called Mana Waka, and the director of that was the late, great Miriama, who starred here at Venice with a couple of her films in the film festival, and who reconstructed the archival footage, decades old, to make Mana Waka. And in that film you'll see the relationship of the carvers and the canoe makers with not just the wood, but the tree. And that's, I think, what we're looking for and what we're attempting to revive, to claim again. I hope that answered your question. Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Of course, the students have another round of questions, but we would like to invite the audience to participate in this discussion. So I think we started a few minutes late, so we can take a few more minutes. So if anyone wants to join, please go to the microphone. While you do that, as a Shakespearean, if you don't mind adding an interesting reference, there is a very famous Maori production of William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice that I think it's famous among Shakespeareans. I don't know what is its status in Maori culture, so maybe we'll have that discussion later because now the focus is on something else.
Of Venice, the 1990s production by a group of extraordinary Māori visionaries and show-offs and performers. What made it special is that our language has been under threat. We have very few of us left who are fluent speakers. In 1972, 50 years ago, almost to the month, actually in September, Ngā Tamatoa, our activist young radical group, took a petition to the New Zealand government to have Māori as a language taught in the schools. 20 years later, in response to that, Shakespearean scholars of Māori descent, one of whom was an extraordinary gentleman scholar named Rochefort Jones. He translated many sonnets and many works of Shakespeare into Māori because they kind of fit. Like Samoan, we have a high language, the language of the chiefs and the orators, and we have the language of everyday people. So the Shakespearean context fitted the Māori. It was immensely popular in the school system. Referring again to the 1972 petition, by 1975, Māori was declared an official language. This is a huge relief to a people, and I don't want to get into the negative stuff, but whose parents had been thrashed and bashed for speaking Māori in the schools, who were refused service for speaking Māori in the street or in the shops, who were seen as pagan and primitive if they didn't present with a BBC received accent. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family of entertainers and tour guides. So for us, having perfectly enunciated English was bringing home the bacon. It was about the value of that to the family. However, we sustained our traditional practice. So what the tourists see and hear is quite different from how we live. And that was the basis of my PhD. I think that was an answer. Yes, it was.
Francesca Tarocco has a question for you.
Yes, thank you, that was wonderful, thank you. I wonder if you can say a few words, because we are very, our research focuses on that really here at Niche. If you can say a few words about water, and the relationship with water.
The chant I did at the beginning of my presentation referred to the sky and referred to the land and referred to the people buried within that land, but also the final phrase was ko tangaroa e. Tangaroa, for Māori, is the god of the ocean, but he is also, of course, recognized and appreciated throughout the Pacific. Tangaroa is the energy, the creativity, the force within the oceans, but within the Māori world, we have Waimoana, which is, of course, the waters of the ocean, and Waimaori. And Waimaori means clear water and inland water, rivers, lakes, streams. And then we have another term, which is Waiariki. Ariki means exalted chief, grand, important person, the kind of family that will build a house like this. And Waiariki is the water of the gods, but it is thermal water, and it is boiling hot, and it is the source of energy. So we have different categories, and we've had tribunal hearings and discussions. Just a very quick précis. 1840, they signed the treaty with us. 1842, the buggers broke the treaty with us. 1975, in pure white guilt, they set up, or they began to set up, what was known as the Waitangi Tribunal. And it was an extremely adversarial process through which Māori could demand and ultimately gain compensation either in land or in cash for all of the property, all of the cultural rights, everything covered in the treaty that the colonials had stolen, ravaged, plundered. And one of the more famous treaty cases was about water. So if you want to know more, go into the Waitangi Tribunal site. Another point to make, though, is that one of the more famous cases, which is the Whanganui River, is opened by a beautiful phrase, which is ko au, ko te awa, ko au. I am the river, and the river is me. And so that sets up as well a very strong, visceral, but ongoing relationship and understanding of the power of water. And just as a final answer or comment, I could go on for days about this kind of stuff, obviously. Water is regarded as a source of sanctity and purification, so that a lot of our rituals engage water. We're water people. We come from far, far away, over the waves, Tahiti, Hivaoa. We're from Huahine, we're from far, far away. And so we're constantly aware of those currents and of those connections, because the water is also blood. And that's another great big long rant I could do, but I won't.
I think we have time for one final question from, okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Speaking about, thank you, first of all, thank you very much, Huya. It was really powerful, your communication. And I was wondering to ask you if, what's the role of feminism, of indigenous feminism, in all this conceptualization? Because as a white, Palani, Western feminist researchers, scholars, and activists, first of all, activists, I can understand that your last sentences was powerfully addressed also to westernized form of contestation of patriarchy and the way in which patriarchy affect the environments and human relations. So, and I also think that what you was just telling while answering to Francesca about the power of this relation between humans and environments was something that is strongly persistent within the Pacific cultures and especially probably in the Maori concept of mana wahine, so addressing your origins and your position as a scholars, I was wondering what's the role of a positioned statement like your last sentences, and probably what Yuki would call Fafa feminism as an indigenous perspective on the ways in which problems can be acknowledged and solved together.
I don't know where to start. Thank you, Carolina. I'm pleased that you used the word patriarchy, because one of the most severe and horrific impacts, something that really screwed my people up, was the arrival of Christianity and the attempt by the Anglican and also the Catholic capturers and savers of human souls, the attempts they made to subvert, twist, and distort Māori values and really basic Māori concepts of reality. Much of what I've spoken about today is related to our pantheon, our tradition of God and goddess figures, the importance of those beings in our lives. However, the missionaries brought with them literacy and they brought firearms. And so there was a trade-off. There was a trade-off. I'll even admit, my namesake, my great-great-great-grandfather, Te Awekotuku the first, he went to the mission station in the far north with a bunch of his mates in the 1830s, and he asked for a missionary. He asked for one. And he made a promise. If you give me a missionary and teach us how to make use of our land, because they'd seen other Māori prosper with mill wheels and the use of a new technology, not just in weapons systems, but in farming, then it was a really good thing to have a pet missionary. And so what the old man did, he wasn't old then, he was young, what Te Awekotuku did with his gang is that they got a missionary, and they gave this missionary some beautiful arable land with hot springs and a wonderful stream. And the missionaries duly built a little church and set up a mill and farmed grain and grew sheep and did all this stuff. And my community, my family, became extremely wealthy. However, the cost of that was what was known as te rongo pai. So one listened to the messages, because by listening and learning the Bible, one could capture the magic of reading and writing. And it was the reading and writing that was the important trade-off. So we had parallel systems. We kept the old gods, we kept the old ways of worship, we kept the old chants. In my environment, we still perform that. And yet we also embraced a type of Christianity, and we invented at least 3 new ways of worshipping Jehovah, which were a rather fascinating combination of pagan Māori ritual and Christian aesthetic. So we're very resilient and inventive. But coming back to patriarchy, of course, for many people, it gave them license to oppress women, to assert a notion of primogeniture, so that the male son of the firstborn male son of the firstborn male son, which is Judeo-Christian and also obviously incredibly British, became part of our cultural landscape. And we're trying to undo that now. And I've been trying to undo it since I was born. I grew up in a household of women, although it was interesting too in that in our village, and this still happens, I believe, in parts of Samoa, the men lived separately from the women. So there was the boys' shed, and the boys and the men slept over there, and all of the women had the real house, which was kind of brilliant. But anyway, talking more about patriarchal values, they were certainly introduced, and in some tribal areas they were cherished, they were welcomed, and they created new economies and new ways of seeing. And I think I noticed you mentioned the phrase mana wahine. That's another discussion. It's a very new phrase, actually.
I think we would all love to go on for much longer, but we're looking forward to another rich session. I want to thank the environmental humanities students, Melissa Hurlitz and Holden Tarnerf, and the other people who contributed. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart your uncle and all the Maori soldiers that fought for our freedom, because if we're free today in a, dysfunctional, but at least sort of democratic republic, is also because of the sacrifice of them. And of course, we want to wholeheartedly thank Ngahuia Te Awekotuku.
Thank you so much. We are happily now moving on to the second session for today, and I invite Chantal Spitz, Miriama Bono, Tahia Falchetto, and the moderator Erna Ligie and One Wise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So welcome to the final session for today. And you'll see from your programs, it's called Making Representations. And I could define making representations very specifically, or I'm going to, as I have chosen, leave that quite open. So in preparation for this session, myself and the speakers had a conversation yesterday about what we might cover, the types of topics, the areas that we might go into. And representation was chosen for this session because of Yuki's work. And if you've been to Going Native, you'll realize that from many different angles, representation is actually something that is evoked or provoked or shown in many guises. Whether it's the videos and people self-representing, or Yuki's analysis of Gauguin's paintings and the power of representation in those, in the upcycling, for example. And so that's why we've left it quite open. So in guiding this session, I suggested that each of the speakers pull something from their own experience, their professional experience and their expertise in order to address this very broad idea of representation. So to draw from their own experience. I've deliberately not introduced anyone so far because I think actually, if we're talking about representation, people should probably present themselves. So my name is Erna Ligie, and I'm a curator at the National Museum for World Cultures in the Netherlands. My colleague you'll see at the end is One Wise. She's also a curator there, and she'll be assisting with translation. Because as you probably are aware, one of the results of colonialism is that the Pacific has French-speaking and English-speaking parts, which has a lasting effect in terms of people connecting to this day. Oh, and Spanish-speaking. So, thank you. So perhaps we'll start with introductions, if you'd like to say a little bit about yourselves.
Yaurana, excuse me, but I have catch cold. So, I'm Chantal Spitz. I'm a Tahitian writer, the first Tahitian novelist. I published the first Tahitian novel in 1991. And I have been a school teacher for, 27 years, and now I'm retired. So I'm a mother, I'm an auntie, I'm a friend, I'm a lover, I'm a grandma, and almost, comment tu dis, grandmother in 6 months. Yes. And I have been involved very soon, very, comment tu dis, tôt. Very early in anti-nuclear protests and in independentist movement. So my dream is to to die Tahitian and not French.
Yorana. So my name is Miriama Bono. I'm actually the director of the museum in Tahiti. So the name is Musée de Tahiti et des îles Tefaremanaha. And I'm also involved since 10 years into the FIFO, which is a documentary film festival, which deals with Oceanian topics, where we are screening films from Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia, and well, all the Pacific, and Hawaii too. And some things to mention. It's that it's a festival which is bilingual. You have English and French films presented. So, well, it makes this festival quite unique in Tahiti and in the Pacific. And, well, like Chantal, I'm also a mother, trying to be a lover. And sometimes hoping to have more time to be a painter. So, well, since I'm a kid and all my life I've been involved in culture and also interest into exchange. Well, will be the beginning of my presentation after, but like many people in Tahiti, I'm what we call mixed. I mean, my mother is Tahitian, but my father is Italian. So I grew up in a mixed culture. And so I'm particularly happy to be here back in Italy because it's been 20 years since I didn't came, so it's a nice opportunity for me. And that's quite all. And I hope Chantal will stay a long time again with us until we become just Tahitian and not French Polynesian.
Hello, my name is Tahia Te Falchetto, and Hélène too, in French. I'm very intimidated to be here. Thank you for hearing and being there. It's my first time. I come from Marquesas Island, Nukuhiva, so it's the North Island where the two famous graves are laid at Hivaoa, Gauguin and Brel. And I did my high school at Tahiti, 1,000 kilometers from my home, and come in France for study 22 years ago. So I'm like, I don't know if I'm from there, from here, I don't know. But and since few years, I'm involved in a festival, a cinema and literature about only the Pacifique, which is localized in Rochefort, which is a town close to Bordeaux, between Bordeaux and Nantes, on the Atlantic coast. And it's a place with people who are the wish to let the place to the Oceanian to talk through their books or their movies, and it's what I'm looking for now, because I was a dancer in the past, like Club Med, and now like very beautiful ladies with very graceful, and it's not over for me, but I needed more, and through this festival it's very, very interesting to see how neighbors deal with colonization, or how they deal with subject topics, and it's very rich for me, and hope to be rich for everybody too, and trying to involve also Oceanians who are living in France, and because I'm the only one, mostly, and yeah, it's difficult because maybe, I don't know if it's in the culture or whatever. Me, I'm not good, I don't have lots of ideas of our culture, Polynesian or Marquesian, because I'm from a fisherman family, so we feed people, we don't do music or dance or whatever, but anyway, it interests me a lot. That's it.
Thank you very much. And you're not the only intimidated person here. I've got 2 chandeliers in front of me. So, not 1, 2. So, yeah, it's an impressive space that we're in. If you're online, you can probably make out the grandeur of this place. So perhaps, I don't know who would like to go first in terms of sharing a story about their experience.
So I go first. As I said, I grew up in a mixed culture, so I understand when I was a child how difficult it can be to understand each other, and also, to understand each other without projection on whatever you can think about what the other is thinking. I mean, maybe it's something that is not specific to being 2 different cultures, but so I realized when I was a kid how misunderstanding can come very easily, even when you are in love or very close to people. So I realized how difficult it can be when you're not involved in a relationships to understand others. So when I grew up, I understood also that what I was looking for was not understanding, but respect. And that's quite a different way of putting the things, because it's interesting to be different, and it's interesting also to be able to respect the others with their differences. Yes. So in my professional life, as I said, I'm involved in culture, and I start working for the FIFO, the film festival. Not because I'm involved in documentaries and all that. This is not really my specialty, but because the topics of this festival was to make people from the Pacifique speak with their own voice. The topics was to that we have to let Polynesian people deal with Polynesian subject, and also to encourage them to speak with their own language. So that's why I get the engagement in this festival, because I really think that we have to, for the topics of representation, that what is important is how we want to represent ourselves. And that's also the same way we are trying to do at this museum that we are rebuilding, because the museum in Tahiti is in new process of rebuilding. So since 5 years we are in so is that okay with the microphone? No, it's okay. Yeah, so I'm going to take the opportunity to have the translation in French, because as I arrived 2 days ago from Tahiti, I'm quite jet-lagged too. So I want to be sure that you understand what I'm saying. So, en fait, ce que je voulais dire par rapport au musée, c'est que ce qui compte dans le nouveau projet du musée de Tahiti, c'est de pouvoir faire un musée des Polynésiens pour les Polynésiens.
So what she wants to say and share with us is that what is important in the establishment of the new Museum of Tahiti is to have a museum that is made by Polynesians for Polynesians.
Justement pour pouvoir apporter une autre, justement pour pouvoir apporter une autre vision et offrir aux Polynésiens l'opportunité d'avoir leur propre représentation.
So exactly because of the fact that they wanted to offer another vision, and also offer Polynesians to have to recognize themselves in what they are seeing.
Parce que, et c'est l'objet d'une conversation que nous avions hier, ça part d'un constat du fait que les jeunes générations, ou même ma génération, avaient tendance en fait à se dévaloriser et à se dire que les notions culturelles que nous pouvions avoir étaient moins bonnes que celles qui venaient par exemple d'Europe.
People of younger people and even people of her generation had a tendency to devalorize their own cultural notions, and they thought that the things that were coming from outside, especially from Europe, were more important and had more value than their own cultural values.
Et donc, en fait, ce qui compte pour nous maintenant, c'est vraiment de pouvoir, comme je vous le disais pour le festival de films documentaires, de pouvoir exprimer notre propre voix et en fait d'être dans une démarche de respect par rapport à nos propres valeurs.
So what is important also in the development of the film festival is to have our own voice and also be able to... J'ai oublié ce que tu avais dit.
Je disais de pouvoir avoir une démarche de respect par rapport
and act in a respectful way towards our own cultural values.
So, Miriama?
Thank you. I will not disagree with Miriama, but I don't have the same approach of the representation. Like Ngahuia talked before, the Christianization and the colonization just blew up our world. And my contact with the representation was when I entered the college, but it's at 10-year-old. I don't know how you say college in English.
It would be middle school.
Middle school. So it was in 1964, and we did not have many French people living in Tahiti. We only had the professors and the doctors and some militaries. It was before the nuclear testing. So we were like autarcie. So we did not have much to do with French people. I did not have French friends because we did not know French people. So when I entered the middle school, we only had French teachers and many French students. So my parents decided, my sister and us, to learn Latin and Greek. Yes. Yes, thank you. So, for 7 years I went in this school, and maybe for 4 years I was the only Tahitian student in my classroom. So I was confronted to racism, basic racism. Like one teacher would tell me, oh, no, you could not write this piece because you're Tahitian. And Tahitian don't understand these things because I was one of the best student in French language. I was one of the best. So like this, and I was put aside in the classroom. It was really violent. So I had the opportunity to have reflection of the difference and how they see us, the French people. I talk about the French people, how the French people used to see us. We are the myth, you know, the whakawahine, and a little bit stupid, but the whakawahine waiting for the white man to come and running in the French sailor's bed, you know. But, and yes, and still now we are looked at like this. We are the myth. You look at Paul Gauguin's paintings. We look so stupid on the painting, like we don't think, just the brain is just like this. No, tuck, 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 just like this. And so when I was a teenager, I read many books written on us, and I just knew that it was not the reality, because for 200 years we were written, we were painting, we were filmed, and never we had our voice to talk about us. So when I was a teenager, I already had this in my mind. It's not the reality. Like they see me, I'm not this. And in 1961, we had this huge Hollywood film, Mutiny on the Bounty, with Marlon Brando, of course, Marlon Brando. And a beautiful Tahitian woman, Tarita, so beautiful. They fell in love, and they get married, and they got children, Marlon Brando and Tarita. And I don't know if you saw the movie, but it's just so Hollywood. And the love affair, and when the sailors came in, they were so clean and so smell so good. And then you read, because I learned this at school, when the sailors came, they had scorbut, so the teeth were, and they were all burned. And we had a word like this, for this, it's papa, it's burnt skin. And they were ugly. And they smelled, because they did not have shower. So they smelled. And when you read all the first writings on Tahitian people, they say, they take a bath 3-4 times a day. They are really beautiful skin, and they smell good, and so I said, should my grandma run into the bed of those, comment dire, non mais qui sont mauvais, smelling men, when they had beautiful men? No, definitely no. So it was the beginning of when I realized that please don't trust what they said, and please don't trust what they wrote. So I decided to write our history, so it was the first novel.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's as if we are 3 generations more or less represented here. It's very interesting. Chantal knows the country at the beginning of the colonization. You grew up with it, and me too also, but in Marxist Island there is le renouveau de la culture.
There's the renewing of culture.
The Marxian culture since only 50 years, with tattoo. Now Marxian tattoo is known in the worldwide. There's a very exceptional documentary who talk about that Tiki travel all over the world now, whereas the missionary 100 years ago, more or less, tried to kill it. and me in my family, so no culture, no music, just fish and feed people. I started to be interested because at school we had an exhibition, une sortie.
Oh, they had a school outing.
A school outing to discover archaeological rests of our ancestors. So it was big rocks, like a platform. So the time couldn't broke all of that. And before that, I was like, we knew that we work on the mountain, on the island. You see that, but okay, it's there. And then they click. Said, yeah, it's your ancestor who lived there. And I said, okay, so to make the connection with history of a mom, talking about things of the past, and dancers trying to remain how was it in the past, trying to ask the old people, tell us what is our story in the past, how was the dance. And I was in front, at the middle of all of that, and I was very interested, even if I was not engaged. And as if now, with the Rochefort Pacifique Festival, I'm just trying to understand and to discover all of that. I didn't know that it was forbidden to be a whakawahine in Samoa, and it's crazy because my look changed when I knew that with the Yuki's work, and to understand why it's so important and so powerful to do that. So me, as a Marquesian, when I came in France 22 years ago, no internet, it was the beginning, it helps me a lot to be a Marquesian. People was like, wow, you are from there so far. Oh yeah, Gauguin, Brel. And I remember Lucien Kimitete, which was the man who tried to make the renew of the culture, who said, oh, you know, Marquesas Island is not only two graves, there are peoples behind. And I kept that with me. But it was true from my experience that it really helped people to be welcome instead of, you are a foreigner. And so I use it to, yeah, I'm a Marquesian. But now with ages, I don't know, with years, I'm like, no, okay, no way to, I don't want to be the person who is listening your dreams and what you want to go, why you want to go there. And whereas for me, it's just, I want to go home, to go back home. And so now I'm quite reactive. But I know, I understand also people, but what to do with that? So with the Rochefort Pacifique Festival, the main goal is to try to go through the cliché to show there's community, culture behind, and not only dancers smiling. And also I had, for example, we talked about that yesterday, that people meet me when they know that I'm Marxist or not, they change their mind, they open and they said, oh, are you surfing? Because Te Awekotuku waves is very famous. And now I said, oh, do you know how to make sausages? But as a French symbol of France. And it's there like, whoa. Yeah, as when I said, no, I'm not Tahitian, not how do you say it? Pas tout à fait.
Not completely. I'm not completely
Tahitian, but I'm Marquesian, and they say, oh, maybe it's the same from, it's so far, so it's the same, and I just try to make them represent the fact that it's, as you say, in France, you have the Corsica Island, which is a very reactive also. There are reactive people say that Corsica is Breton.
Oh, to say that Corsican is like the same as people from Brittany is
it's
it
impossible.
Really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and yeah. Well, this is those example of representation I met all the time, And the most difficult for now is that, oh, it's my dream to go there. And I'm like, yeah, it's just my wish to go back home. And okay, enough.
Maybe to explain a little bit, French Polynesia was made by French state. So it's five countries independent, the one from the other. So Marquesian or Marquesians, Tahitians or Tahitians. And then we have the Tuamotu, where the nuclear testing were. We have the Austral Island, and we have the Gambier. So it's 5 independent countries that were unified to form French Polynesia by the French. And we are as foreign as like us and Samoan, like Samoan and Aotearoa. It's the same people, but we are different. We are the same at the beginning, but in the time and in the migration, we became different. So Marquesian or not Tahitian. So yes, but in the mind of the people, everything is Tahiti, you know, because Tahiti is very famous.
Yeah, so how that was said in the conversation yesterday was almost Tahitian, which was actually kind of a funnier way to say it in some ways, because it really gets to that, your further point, Tahia, which was that it's so far away that it's the same place, which I think is a beautiful way to express it. And I think we've had both sort of positive and negative versions of what representation can mean. And I wonder if we could sort of settle on the toxic for the moment, because actually one of the things that we talked about yesterday were the constraints of representation and how that cuts off opportunities. And so, Chantal, you said something about reading, and reading not being a part of how some Tahitian people think of themselves, that we're not readers, we're not writers, it's not important to us.
Yes, because now we think that before Christianity we were savages, and the first step to become human was to become Christian, and the second step was to become French. So everything that is not Christian or French or Western is not human, you see. So when we became Christian, the missionaries with the Arii of Tahiti, I speak for Tahiti only. The Arii of Tahiti is the big chief, and the missionaries, they put some laws: forbidden to dance, forbidden to sing, forbidden to tattoo, everything was forbidden. But everything was in Tahitian language. And when French came, forbidden to speak Tahitian. So everything that made us as human beings was forbidden. So and one thing we don't talk about, we almost disappeared, because with the epidemics, the alcohol, everybody died. Like when Wallis was the first European to come to Tahiti. When he arrived, he said, well, maybe there are between 100,000 and 200,000. in at the beginning of the 20th century, we were 6,000. Everybody died. So when people died, they died with the memories. They died with the savoir, the knowledge. And because it was like this, the transmission was like this and not like this, many knowledges disappear. So we had no memories, but the most important is everything Tahitian was considered like not important and less human. So the reading and the writing still now are considering like not Tahitian. It's not for us. It's for Western. It's for French. And even our literature, Tahitian will say, it's not real literature, you know. It's literature, but not the real one, because the real one is French and Western. So our work is looked at like not really interesting. And even in school, teachers, and they said, oh no, it's not for our kids. Reading is not for our kids, and writing is not for our kids, and painting and everything that the culture which came from outside, it's not for us. And even the parents, I was school teacher, when I said to some parents, you know, your kid is really intelligent, he's really smart, he can go very far, and they would say, he's smart. He's not smart, because we interiorized that school success is not for us. It's for the other one, or it's for the half caste like us. So, but root people don't believe that it's for them, so it's very difficult. And that's reading. We read since 1815, when they translated the Bible in Tahitian, and we write from since 1815. But in our mind, reading and writing in Tahitian is not real reading. Real reading is reading in French, in English, but not in Tahitian. And all the literature, all the Tahitian literature from 1815 is not studied, because university, how do you say,
researchers.
Yeah, researchers say, oh, Tahitian literature began in 1970. And all the literature written in Tahitian is not studied. It's completely unknown, even for us. And because many of us, many of our children don't speak, don't understand, and don't read Tahitian. So it's very difficult.
Clear. Yeah, no, very clear. And perhaps I've depressed everyone by asking the question.
I'm the specialist of depress.
Oh, good, I've got an expert.
But maybe if I can say something?
Yes, please.
Just wanted to say that that's why I think that it's important not to focus on the representation that others have on ourselves, but to work on our own representation, because, well, I'm a positive person, as you know. And yeah, I know you too, of course you are. But what I want to say is that I think it's important to this quite sad constat that we have to learn to our children, to the next generation, how they have to deal with that. And so it's important for us, I mean all of us, that we try to, to give them proud of what the ancestors made before them, and to be proud of what they can do after, because as Chantal said, it's also the way that Tahitian kids are seeing themselves, and that this is negative, that caused the fact that they don't want to learn because they think that school or going to the museum or going to see documentaries is not for them, it's for European people. And I think it's important to change that and to make them realize that they can take the voices, that their voices is important, and that they have to be proud of their language, of their history, of their ancestors, and all the things that link us all together. And I think it's not a way to forget the bad aspect of the past, but that's a way also to turn all those things into positive vibration, to make them go through all that. And I think it's, why I mentioned the fact that I think that we are in a new, as you said, I hope that for the new generation we are at a new point where we are all women and mother and grandmother, and so we all have tried to rise, and we all want them to have the best of what the history teaches. And so I think that that's why I said, and I know we agree, you and me, I know that, but that's why I said that I'm looking for respect, because I think that understanding it's over and it's too late maybe, but we can build something else, and which maybe will be more powerful for our kids. That's what I wanted to say.
And perhaps also self-respect, because if we're talking about the internalized limits that children can be taught. Yeah. But your work as a director, I mean, that's exactly what the work you're engaged in is, trying to reorient something like an institution that can be frightening into something that's actually for the people.
Yes, that's, truly the real défi.
The challenge.
Yes, the real challenge of the new project that we are making at the museum, which is not just to rebuild a building, but also to make something new, and to make something new, as I said, for Polynesian people, and by two aspects. The first one is that un tiers, so it's
1/3.
1/3, excuse me. Yeah. 1/3 of the people coming to this museum are kids, so it's a very pedagogical, institution, and it gives us a certain responsibility, because most of all those kids are Polynesians, and also Chantal has. She was right to mention that we have 5 archipels, because as you heard, the museum is called Tahiti et ses îles, which is quite weird because it should be not Tahiti and her islands, but all the islands of French Polynesia. And so we are also trying to be more representative for all the other archipels, to show the specificity of each other, because as I said, it's also a point of respect of what they are, what a Marquesan can be, or what people from the Austral are in the language, but also in the expression of the collections. So that's 2 points which are very important for us on the representation that we all have, and as you said, from also try to engage a certain way of self-respect, because if you know, specificities of your culture, and that if you can be proud of that, you can go further.
Tahiti is colonizing the other archipelagos.
So it really is Tahiti and her islands. Okay. Well, we might start a new controversy now. Okay. Yeah, the self-respect aspect. Perhaps I can add an additional story, which is at the National Museum we had a group of about 20 people from West Papua who came into the collections, and they're members of the diaspora community, all different generations, some who are second and third generation as well. And to see the expression on their faces when they went into the depot and saw en masse material from West Papua and also New Guinea more broadly, I mean, there was silence and people standing there feeling the power of it. And later in conversation, many of the comments were about the pride of it and the feeling that they were getting from this material culture. It was just a very profound sense of connection, but also of pride, because many hadn't seen the material culture and the very high level of artistic accomplishment. But more than that, of course, it's many aspects that they were feeling very fundamentally in those moments. But the conversation was about, well, how do we take this forward, and what use can that community make of the collections in order to instill that in subsequent generations in particular. And so perhaps I'll turn to you, Tahia. You mentioned something about, well, you didn't put it this way, but you said it was the strategic use of your Marquesianness in order to open doors, in order to make people comfortable and to make a home for yourself. I wonder, in our conversation yesterday, we mentioned, well, it was a very broad topic and perhaps a little intimidating as well. And so I said, well, is there something you would like to communicate to a younger generation? Is there something important that you would like to pass on? So I'm wondering, have you, if you'd be prepared to share any thoughts about that? Or not?
Just maybe to help me to try to answer you. For now, it's quite difficult to see how, for example, my culture, the Marquesian culture, is spread, and how people wear tattoos. Sometimes they don't know the meaning. We saw someone yesterday, the souffleur de verre at Murano, who has a Marquesian tattoo.
He was blowing glass.
Yeah, and he saw us looking at his hand like this, and he was like, and it was okay. He said, oh, it's an Italian who tattooed him, a Marquesian tattoo. But sometimes also I can see, for example, women who stay with a Marquesian man, and he said that she is Marquesian, sometimes much more Marquesian than I can be, because I'm not like, look at, I'm Marquesian here, whatever. And it's quite difficult for me to support that, because it's the mirror of me to let me question that how am I a Marquesian? And we had a very interesting discussion yesterday about it's not the husband of a Marquesian lady can't be especially Marquesian or another country. Huh? And so my message is maybe a very old message and not mine, that it's really important to know who you are, and maybe in a dans un monde idéal.
In an ideal world.
In an ideal world, we should all have a psychological therapy. Not because you are fool, but just to try to make the ménage.
To do some kind of housekeeping.
Housekeeping of... because we are all mixed now, there are no more Marxian pure or Tahitian or whatever. And yeah, no, my message is not do psychological therapy, but it's helped a lot. And yeah, personally, I start something like that, and discover lots of things and to find its place in our world, to be yourself as Marxian, or just yourself, as you said yesterday, Chantal, to be yourself. That's it.
Yeah, I don't find it surprising that we might need psychological help and housekeeping, given the population decline and all of the tragic circumstances around colonialism and the losses associated with that. So housekeeping's a great idea. And I think your wonderful suggestion is a positive one that we can probably wrap up on. So please join me in thanking our speakers. And one final message is that I've been asked to invite you all to drinks. So apparently we follow Barbara or Francesca. Great, thank you.